Please be seated. As I mentioned at the beginning of the service, is that in October we will be focusing our sermons on stewardship. And I pray that these sermons will provide an opportunity for us to grow and reflect on our role as stewards of all of God's gifts. So what does stewardship mean? I found two definitions that I combined, and I really like the way that it sounds. The careful and responsible management of all resources God provides for the glory of God and the betterment of his creation. The careful and responsible management of all resources God provides for the glory of God and the betterment of his creation. So the psalmist this morning praises God for all of his wondrous deeds, all of his creations. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you have set in their courses. I imagine God, like children do, finger painting, and they're painting with their fingers and they're dipping. And so God dips in his paint and he draws, and poof, a tree. And he draws, and poof, some clouds. And he draws, and poof, birds and animals and people and fish and all creation. And then the psalmist says, you have done such marvelous things. Why do you bother? Why do you bother with us mere humans? Like, why us? Why are we particular to you? He responds, you give humans mastery over the works of your hands. You put all things under his feet. In other words, God created us human beings in his image and has given us the responsibility to steward, to care for all of God's creations. All the sheep, the psalmist says, and the oxen, even the wild beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and whatsoever walks in the path. All are now have been entrusted. All these gifts and resources have been entrusted to us mere humans, as the psalmist says. I would add to what the psalmist talks about what is entrusted to us. I would add not only birds and the seas and the air and the land, but I would also add that we're called to steward the financial resources, the money, the time, the gifts and the talents, and the power that God has given us. All of these are also gifts from God that we are called to steward. We are called to care for all of those gifts that God has entrusted us. And remember, it says not owners. We are not owners. We are stewards. We are here to care for, to grow things, to find the best way for all of these gifts to be for the betterment of God's kingdom. And so how we care for all of creation, for all of those gifts, matter. Instead of polluting, we're helping grow. Yesterday there was a work day for the community gardens that we have here on our campus. If you drive out, for those of you who are visiting, if you drive out, you look out into the big open space, you'll see some fences, and in those fences are these plots of soil, and they've been tilled and they've been grown. And yesterday was the work day for them, so we had people here doing just that, caring for God's creation. They were weeding, they were watering, they were planting some seeds, they were tending to God's creation. And I don't know if you all are aware, but a lot of those fruits and vegetables are given to people who don't have access to fruits and vegetables, right? So our members of our congregation, as well as from the community, are tending and caring and being good stewards of this land for the betterment of God's kingdom. So it feeds them, but it also feeds those who have less. How we use our money is also important. Our money is to help take care of our families, our community, ourselves, right? How we use our time and talent. Are we using our time and talent in a way that helps build up in ways that it brings new life to people? Yesterday was a busy day at St. John's because we were having people working on the community gardens, but over here by the parking lot, there were some of us, and we were welcoming our neighbors as they brought their pets because we were celebrating the Feast of St. Francis, and so we were doing blessings, right? And some of you came, which was really fun to meet your furry family friends, family members. But Nancy gave up her time and her talent for this effort. She helped build a flyer, but she didn't stop there. Nobody asked her. It was a surprise to me, but Nancy drives up in her scooter and she says, I took some of the flyers and I've been handing them out to people who are walking their dog. And if I see people outside in their house, on their yards, I give it to them. So her time and her talent were used to build bridges between the church and the community who may not even know that we exist, right? Who we are. And guess what? We had a car drive up, and there was this man with his two nephews and their two cats. Let me see if I remember. Garfield and Shadow. And they got a blessing, and they were excited. And they were excited that somebody had welcomed them. They don't live very far. They live off of Kramer. But because Nancy took her scooter, her time and her talent to welcome people in, now they may be coming in, I don't know, maybe to play soccer, or maybe to participate in the garden, maybe to bring their bicycles, and who knows, maybe to come in to hear the good news of the world, because they have been shown, not just in words, but in deeds, that this community cares about them. And I would also add that part of the things that we're called to steward is our power. You see, today in the gospel, we see Jesus being tested once again by the Pharisees. Is divorce okay, Jesus? What do you think? Clearly, this is a conversation that's been going on in the community, and there's been like, who's in, who's out, right? What's going on? And so they test Jesus. And Jesus, true to his teaching, says, who has the power and who is the vulnerable? And so he focuses on that. Because you see, I want to give a little bit of a context of what's the complexity of Jesus's answer. Jesus had been seeing what had been happening to women who had been divorced. They had been discarded. They had been left for extreme poverty, extreme vulnerability. There were very little things divorced women could do once they were given that certificate and told to go away. So he had seen the ramifications. He had seen what was happening to the children of those relationships, of those marriages. And so he says to them, you Pharisees who are making these rules, you have the power to care for women and children. Do it. Don't hide behind these new rules you've created for yourself to be no longer responsible for those who you're responsible for, who those you have claimed you were going to care for. Don't forget your responsibility and use your power to care for the most vulnerable. So he reminds them, steward your power in a way that's going to be for the kingdom of heaven. Be for a place where people can thrive. Be for a place where people who are the most vulnerable will be cared for. So what about today? We are still called to be good stewards of the power that we have been given. Because you're right, women have more rights today. There are options for women who get divorced. Yet we know there is still an imbalance of power. There's still an imbalance of power in this world, and there are consequences to when things go awry. The number one reason people go from living above the poverty level to below the poverty level is divorce. The number one reason. There's a huge financial toll on families, and it can be devastating. So you may be saying, oh, some other Minerva, you're saying, stick it out, even if it's dangerous, let those women suffer, or those men who have been abused. But no. That is not what I'm saying. We all have the responsibility to use the power that we have to care for the most vulnerable. So we're in dangerous relationships. We need to use the power that we have in their societies and our communities, need to protect those who are in dangerous relationships, and need to provide a safety net for them to be able to move into a place of safety, so where they can rebuild their lives, rebuild relationships where they can thrive and where their children can thrive. On the way here, not kidding, on the way here, some of you may have heard it, they were talking to this woman who had been in a very violent relationship, and she was sharing her story of what it took for her to be able to leave the relationship and be safe. So I am not saying one should stay in a dangerous relationship. What I'm saying is we should use the power that we have to make this kingdom a better place. And when people are in bad relationship and in violent relationship, we need to support that. And I'm also saying that relationships are important. Healthy marriages are good for us as well. So just like the gifts that come from God, good, healthy relationships can also need also to be stewarded, so they can be for the glory and for the betterment of His creation. Healthy marriages provide love and care for the couple. It provides stability for the community. They allow each other of us to grow and develop. And yes, to change, because we're all called to grow and change and develop. And in good relationships, spouses can encourage that growth in one another. Any relationship requires time and attention, compromise, patience, forgiveness, and not just giving up when things get difficult. So it's kind of this both and, right? And how we use that power to create those spaces for people to grow and develop, but also to have the space and the capacity to leave those unhealthy relationships when necessary. Jesus reminds us today of our responsibility to be and care for the most vulnerable, to steward all of our gifts that we have, all those gifts that God has entrusted us, so that we can protect the most vulnerable, not just for them to be safe, but for them to thrive. These are difficult. Being good stewards of all of our gifts are difficult and hard, because we have to discern. But I invite you is for us to pray so that we continue to grow as disciples of Christ, so that with God's help, we'll be good stewards of all of God's gifts for the glory of God and for the betterment of His creation. Amen.